she's staring at.
It's Berzerk, released in 1982 for Atari. But wait a minute. This isn't the Atari 2600 version that we've spent 2 videos on already. This looks like the Atari 5200 version of Berzerk. How can that be, though? Have I lost my mind? Have I finally got my hands on the infamous Atari 5200 Super System, found the necessary disk space to store the system, and somehow managed to snag a unit with something resembling proper functioning controllers? Well, of course I didn't. Come on, don't be silly. I'm not that insane. I like my shit to work right out of the box, or even before it. Now, what I did was I fetched for one of those Atari 400 mini things on that Amazon Prime Day deal. It's a nice little machine that has about 20-ish games from the various Atari 8-bit computer line, and you can even sideload your own game ROMs, which means, well, there's other stuff that we can look at, and we will. But yeah, I'm actually liking this thing. I don't care for the joystick that it comes with. I've never been a fan of the classic Atari joystick. And this version with its little nubby shoulder button and this version's attempt to turn the directional circle decal thing into 4 separate buttons. I'll admit, that's a bit clever, but nope, not for me. Fortunately, you could use other USB-based gamepad things, so I ended up using a Sega Saturn controller thing that I had lying around, and that seems to work fine. Anyway, this version of Berzerk that we're playing is a prototype version for the Atari 8-bit computers, which is basically just the 5200 version, but on a computer, and the joysticks aren't total crud, so that's pretty much what we're working with here. Anyway, it's Berzerk, the classic Stern Electronics arcade game where you control a little guy in this labyrinth of death, shooting robots before they shoot you, exiting rooms before Evil Otto comes along to chase you off the screen, and try not to touch the walls because they will kill you. Fortunately, they will also kill any robots stupid enough to run into them, and the robots will sometimes kill themselves, so use that to your advantage. It's fairly similar to the 2600 version, obviously with some slightly nicer graphics and sound effects, 8-way shooting for both humanoids and robots, and this version also includes the voice synthesis feature that was a highlight in the arcade game. Fairly mechanical sounding, but you're dealing with robots that are trying to kill you, so in that context, it's fine. Would have been nice if the speech didn't pause the gameplay so that it could taunt you or warn you that Evil Otto was coming, but I'd imagine that's technical limitations at play, so it's something players had to endure back in the day. And speaking of enduring back in the day, the Atari 5200 controller is often cited as one of the worst malfunctioning pieces of engineering ever conceived, and I can't imagine playing a game like Berzerk being a fun time playing with its somewhat flimsy analog stick. But if you're playing with a proper controller, as is the case here, Berzerk controls just fine. You press the fire button to shoot, using the stick to aim in any 8 directions. Your boy moves a bit slowly and stiffly, but this isn't a problem until the later rounds, where the robots and their shots start moving a lot faster. Berzerk doesn't have the game variations of the 2600 version, you merely have the option to play on any of the first 11 skill levels, but this version does support 2-player alternating play, which is something the 2600 version did not have. Berzerk on the 8-bit Atari is not a substantial upgrade from the 2600 version. The graphics are only slightly nicer in this version, there's slightly more text here and there, and that's all you could really say about the game visually. Even on the sound front, setting aside the added voices, the only real upgrade are that the sound effects are slightly nicer sounding, but not by much. The sounds on their own are just fine. Stock Atari sounding sounds, but that's about it really. If that's your thing, great. If not, that's okay too. It is what it is, and it does what it does well enough. And that's all you can really ask for from a game of this era. Overall, Berzerk on the Atari 5200, or the Atari 400, or the Atari 800, or whatever. Well, it's the same old Berzerk you've played on the 2600, but with added voices and nicer presentation that brings it closer to replicating that arcade feel. The 5200 version is hampered with poor quality controllers, which would make the 2600 version the better version by default. But that said, if you take the controller aspect out of the equation, Berzerk is just as good of a game here as it was on the 2600, and if you could put up with the stiffness of the player character, there is a good time to be had with Berzerk, regardless of what version you're playing, so long as the controller isn't utterly terrible.